Welcome to the IREL podcast. Are you sick and tired of real estate gurus pitching their next pre-construction deal only to find out years later they were completely wrong? Worried the next overseas conference you spend thousands to attend will only be used to sell overpriced lots and deserted developments? Join thousands of other international real estate seekers who are looking for their place in paradise without the sales pitch. Straight from your host, Taylor White.
Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of the IREL podcast. I am your host, Taylor White. I am extremely excited to have an absolute on-the-ground insider on the show today with Matt Ridgway from Chile Investments in Santiago, Chile, and we will get the true story on the local real estate scene and have you coming away wanting to investigate its local property market further or cross it off your shortlist entirely and continue listening. Right now from Matt, you will learn why someone with wonderlust from England ended up in Chile and why he thinks you might do the same. The exact reasons he splits his time between his boutique vineyard in the Colchagua Valley and Santiago and explains why life couldn't be any sweeter. Exposes what day-to-day life is like dealing with the local Chilean currency and provides surprising insights on how it's fared against the US dollar. Pulls back the curtain on 4 properties he has bought and sold in Santiago, with one in as little as 10 minutes over a glass of wine. Talks about the absolutely insane property appreciation of up to 400% in less than 5 years in specific locations and why he believes there's still room to run, and much more. And don't forget, if you're listening to this podcast and want to grab Matt's contact details, links on buying or selling Santiago real estate, or any other show notes, head on over to irelpodcast.com/11. That's irelpodcast.com/11. Pour yourself a glass of nice Chilean red wine, dig into your seafood ceviche, and open your mind to Matt's insights. In case you can't tell, I'm excited. Let's get Matt on the phone. Hey Matt, it's Taylor White. I'm excited to have you on the IREL podcast today, straight from Santiago, Chile. So we can get to know you personally. Tell us about yourself and where your stomping grounds were before you ended up in the beautiful Colchagua Valley and Santiago.
Hi Taylor, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's great to be here. Well, a little bit about me. I'm originally from England, but I've always had a little bit of a wanderlust. I graduated from university in 2001, spent a while in Paris, and then a year in Australia. So then from Australia, I went back to England for a few months before heading out to South America in September 2003, which is about 10 years ago now, landing first in Ecuador. I lived in Ecuador for a few months, then headed off to Argentina with absolutely no idea what to expect there. I just bought the first plane ticket to the first country I could find, and it was just a couple of years after their worst ever economic crash, which is really saying something for Argentina. It has a bit of a history of ups and downs, but it was pretty much love at first sight to me in Buenos Aires, and I ended up staying there for over 3 years. Now, my ex-girlfriend, my girlfriend at the time was Chilean, so Chile was the next stop once we saw the writing on the wall for Argentina, and we moved over to Chile in 2007, where we started off in Valparaiso, set up a business restoring Victorian mansions in the old port, the UNESCO World Heritage part of the city, and we also help foreigners invest in property in Chile. The personal relationship didn't work out, but I was really happy living in Chile. Decided to stay, maintain the business, although I decided to focus a little bit more on agricultural properties at the time. So that's how I ended up in the Colchagua Valley, which is Chile's pretty much top wine valley, where I have my own little boutique vineyard, which we recently planted just a few months ago. I also work in Santiago, renovating, flipping older apartments in the kind of up-and-coming gentrifying parts of the city. I personally own a flat in the Bellas Artes district, which 4 years ago was a kind of slightly down-on-the-hill neighborhood, but which is now rapidly gentrifying. It's full of bars, cafes, and restaurants, and some cultural centers around there, and also the Bellas Artes Fine Arts Museum, which gives the neighborhood its name.
Awesome, Matt. You are the first insider from Chile on the podcast, so I can't wait to hear about your insights. And so we can get a better idea of you professionally, give us your brief resume leading up to working at Chile Investments.
I kind of came into the real estate business a little bit via chance and a little bit kind of via my kind of family destiny, I guess. When I moved to Buenos Aires, I bought a couple of properties there because it was just a perfect timing just after the crash. The values were really low, and I saw an opportunity. Now, Argentina is a difficult place to do business, my research first, but people started asking me how I'd done it, how I'd bought property there. And after a few weeks of giving out free information, I kind of realized that I was sitting on some valuable information. So I started to charge people for it. So with my ex-girlfriend, we set up a consultancy kind of helping foreigners swim through the, shall we say, the shark-infested waters of the Argentine business environment. And then when we returned to Chile, we just kept on doing the same business. Although I have to say that investing in Chile is vastly easier and much, much safer than Argentina. And I've kind of always been surrounded by property talk. My father's a chartered surveyor in the UK. I'm not sure if your listeners know what chartered surveyors do in the UK, but they work as real estate agents, farm managers, appraisers, and auctioneers as well. So a lot of roles they fulfill. And my mother's always been a keen renovator of houses, much to the annoyance of my father at the time. So I think I was probably influenced by both of them when I was a kid.
Great, Matt. I have also been involved in Buenos Aires real estate, so I can relate to some of the things you were talking about. Now, we are getting more familiar with who you are, both on a personal and professional level. Let's start to dig into your journey just a little bit. Take us back to your mindset. What were some of the reasons why you decided to look at other countries to begin with years ago, and then maybe which countries you were considering before choosing Chile?
Oh, it's a good question. Well, as I mentioned, I always had the desire to travel and live overseas. I think I knew from when I was probably about 10 years old that I wanted to live and work anywhere but the UK. And I was fascinated by Southeast Asia for a really long time. And I really wanted to move out to Thailand or Malaysia. I spent a good few months traveling around the region when I was a student and also when I graduated. But then I went back to the UK and I went to South America basically because I just wanted to learn Spanish. I spoke fluent French at the time, just wanted to learn another Roman language. So the idea was that I'd spend 6 months in South America, learn enough Spanish, and then go look for some kind of work in Spain. 10 years later, 6 months turned into 10 years, and 10 years later, it's kind of become half true because I recently married a girl from Barcelona, so now I spend 6 months a year in Spain. But originally, I had no intention of living long term in South America. It was just one of those things that happens to you without kind of even realizing it. So now I have a vineyard in Colchagua, a flat in Santiago, 4 dogs, 2 cats, and a healthy business. I can't really see myself going anywhere else at the moment.
Matt, listeners and I are always fascinated to learn about which countries people have considered and why. Now, let's delve deeper into Chile as a whole, and then why you chose the areas of the Colchagua Valley and Santiago in particular versus some other popular Chilean locations.
Well, I mean, Santiago is a fairly popular place to go, and I never used to understand why. When I first visited there, exactly December 2003 was my first visit to Santiago, and it was probably one of the worst places I'd ever visited in my life. It was boring, it was dirty, it was a bit dangerous in certain areas, and it was just incredibly joyless. There was no joie de vivre, shall we say. And after the fun and complete mayhem of Buenos Aires, I found the place to be thoroughly depressing. But around 5 or 6 years ago, it actually started to change, and the changes happened really fast. They developed a new ring road, which was a start, and that took half of the traffic out of the city centre. Then the local council started cleaning up the parks, making them safe to be in. And newly wealthy Chileans who benefited from the copper boom over the last few years and the economy going so well, they started to travel all over the world and come back with new ideas. Chileans who never really traveled that much out of the country before. So suddenly Santiago was booming with new bars, restaurants, and cultural centres. And although, I mean, Santiago is never going to have the energy and buzz of Buenos Aires, it's now actually a really nice city to spend time in. I can't believe how much it's changed for the better in such a short space of time. And it kind of makes me feel a little bit proud, which I think after so many years, I think suggests that I'm starting to feel and turn Chilean, actually.
Matt, I haven't personally been to Chile yet, but have bought and sold a few apartments in Buenos Aires, Argentina, have spent time in Lima, Peru, and Montevideo, Uruguay, so I can somewhat relate to some of the things I'm hearing about for Santiago. Through my travels, I am a firm believer in that I either get a place or I don't. Share with us some reasons why Santiago speaks to you.
Well, I have to admit that I don't live in Santiago full time. I come once a week for a couple of days for business and to catch up with friends. I'm more of a country person for full-time living, which is why I'm down in the Colchagua Valley. I really enjoy my life down there amongst the vineyards, and there's a great group of foreigners and locals alike, because it's Chile's kind of best managed wine tourism route. But as I mentioned, Santiago is really fun these days. There's just lots to do now, and watching the city improve itself has just been a bit of a joy for the last 2 or 3 years. In the neighborhood my flat's in is right in the heart of the city, just a few blocks from the main square, the Plaza de Armas, and it's a neighborhood with a real buzz about it. I enjoy spending time here, which I have to say is something I never thought I'd say just a few short years ago. Some great parks, excellent museums, cultural centers, plenty of nightlife. And what I think I've enjoyed most recently is seeing Chileans learn to enjoy their capital city. I mean, if you go to Buenos Aires, for example, you see people out on the streets at all times. And, just maybe 7 or 8 years ago, Chileans wouldn't go out on a Tuesday night. They wouldn't be out in restaurants. And now the neighborhood I'm in, the restaurants are full every single night, and it's really nice. It seems that Chileans are starting to enjoy their city rather than just endure it. And it's definitely made the city better in terms of the atmosphere.
Okay, Matt, we have gotten to know you both personally and professionally, reasons why you chose Chile and why Santiago speaks to you. But get ready, because now it's time for us to pick your brain on the local real estate scene and to get the juices flowing. We're going to do a quick round of what I like to call the real estate hot seat. We'll ask you 5 rapid-fire questions, and you give me an answer in 15 seconds or less each. Matt, are you ready for the Santiago hot seat?
I am ready. Let's go.
Okay, what currency is real estate priced in?
Property here is priced in Chilean pesos.
Is owning property as a foreigner legal?
It's perfectly legal, and you have exactly the same rights as a local Chilean.
Can property be titled?
Yes, it can. When you buy a property, the property goes into your name.
Can money flow in and out of Chile easily, or are there currency restrictions?
There are no currency restrictions whatsoever. It's really easy to get money both in and out of Chile.
And as listeners know, my number one question, Matt, what is your favorite local drink?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I'd say it's a toss-up between a good pisco sour, which is Chile's national drink, a nice glass of really awesome Chilean Sauvignon Blanc on a hot summer's day, or perhaps one of Chile's best red wines from my own valley, the Colchagua Valley.
Nice. Those are 3 great options. But Matt, before we move on, if you don't mind, can you briefly explain what your experience has been thus far in dealing with the Chilean peso for day-to-day cost of living in relation to some other common currencies such as the U.S. dollar, Canadian dollars, euros, pounds? Does it vary widely? Has purchasing power gone up? Has it decreased? Kind of give us your 30,000-foot view.
Well, it's a very important question, actually. The Chilean peso over the last few years has been extremely strong, which has pushed up prices and values in foreign currency terms. The strength comes from the copper price. Over 40% of Chile's GDP comes from mining, and the copper price has been extremely high for the last few years, which has pushed the peso right up. When I first arrived 10 years ago, the dollar was probably around 750 pesos to the dollar. And until very recently, it was actually down to 485, which is it's a hell of a difference. And that's made property very expensive in dollar terms compared to what it was before. I think before the peso was probably a little bit undervalued, and it's been overvalued more recently. It's gone from 485 to now we're at 530, which is around an 8% change in the last 3 or 4 months, and the projection for the next year is going to be a little bit more, probably down to around 550. So compared with, let's say, July of this year, I would suggest that in January, February, March will be around 12% weaker in dollar terms, which means that the country will be 12% cheaper for people buying in dollars.
Fantastic insight, Matt. Okay, you can now relax, but just a little bit, as you are off the Santiago hot seat. But it's time to zero in on the local real estate scene. Give us your brief synopsis on the Santiago real estate market over the last few years, where it is today, and then where you see it heading for the next few years.
I mean, this goes for Chile in general, but I mean, we can talk specifically about Santiago. I'd say that property prices have dramatically increased over the last 10 years. That was partly because there was a very limited local market a few years ago. There were very few buyers, and prices were really insanely low back then. But because the economy's been booming in the last few years, I mean, we're growing at 5% every year. Next year, the projection is for 4% because there's going to be a little bit of a slowdown. But the huge increase in the copper prices and the expansion of the economy has created a fairly large new market of people looking to buy property. Got a lot of younger people who traditionally would live with their parents until they're in their 30s when they get married, now going out and buying properties themselves because they can get mortgages. Mortgages are actually only available to locals and only to people who have a fixed salary. But there's a lot of people out there now who have that, and that's pushed prices up a lot. And I'd say in properties in certain areas have gone up 300 or 400% in 4 or 5 years, which may sound bubble-like, but I just think it's just a hefty upwards market correction. I think prices were way too low before, and now they're just rapidly getting up to what would be considered fair market value. So I think from now on, what we're going to see is possibly a slowdown in the rate of increase, but and possibly a bit of a stagnation period while people adjust to the new prices. But then I would say that there's still movement. There's still room for upwards movement. 8 to 10% a year, I think, would be a fair price. The bargain days are definitely over, although that doesn't mean you can't find a bargain at all. You just need to look a lot harder. I think apartment flipping is a way to make money. Chileans don't have much of an eye for aesthetics. They don't know how to present properties, so they're really majorly impressed by an apartment that's been renovated. As an example, the last 4 apartment renovations I did have taken less than a week to sell, and the last one actually took 10 minutes and a glass of wine.
Wow. Matt, you have us sold on Chile as a country, Santiago as a city, and then its real estate outlook within the near future. Of course, you don't have a crystal ball. I sure as heck don't. No one does. But that is why I think it's so vitally important to get on-the-ground insight from local real estate professionals. And yes, I just use the words local and on-the-ground in the same sentence to drive home a very important fact. Matt, you are not some newsletter writer who might spend a few days in Santiago and then send out emails with hot buys calling yourself an international real estate guru. You are there in the trenches on a daily basis, dealing with local buyers, sellers, agents, lawyers, and every facet of the real estate business. Matt, break this down even further for us. Pretend you are Google Maps or Google Street View. What streets, neighborhoods, or parts of the city are we talking about in Santiago?
Well, it's a very good point you make because, I am actually living permanently in Chile, so I have a bit more of an insight than people who just come down for a few days. In terms of Santiago, my personal favorite area is around the city center. This is Barrios La Estaria, Bellas Artes, and Parque Forestal. It's kind of like it's a tri-zone area. They're all together. It's the most European part of the city, full of older apartment buildings, antique features such as parquet floors, and to me, and really most importantly, really thick concrete sheer walls. That means you can't hear the neighbor going to the toilet like you can in most of the cookie cutter new build monstrosities that I see springing up all over the city. The area is also a historic neighborhood, which means that older buildings can't be torn down anymore. So this naturally limits the supply of apartments coming onto the market. So I think we're going to see some tremendous growth in the area over the next few years. Prices have already doubled in the last 3 or 4 years, and I'd expect to see probably 20% a year for the next few years. It's getting hard to find the bargains these days, though. I mean, the area was full of kind of older people who are, to put it gently, they're slowly dying off, and the apartments are coming onto the market, which they're being bought up by a younger generation who are renovating them. But I think there's still possibilities of finding bargains. Just have to look very hard.
Hey, Matt, just as a side note from places I've personally been, this area sounds a lot like Zona Colonial in Santo Domingo, Casco Viejo in Panama City, Ciudad Vieja in Montevideo, Uruguay, and parts of Cartagena, and also Granada, and I'm sure many other spots in Latin America, in that there's a limited supply and the buildings must be restored to their former glory. Am I kind of on the right track here?
You're definitely on the right track in terms of the limited supply. In terms of I'd say the beauty of the buildings, we're not up there with places like Cartagena, but there's some really nice kind of 1930s, 1940s, 1950s buildings in the area. So the general concept of it being the older part of town, which has kind of been a bit grubby in the past, and which is now gentrifying, is definitely very similar to those areas.
Okay, perfect, Matt. Now that we have specific locations in mind, what types of properties do you recommend? And first, let me give you a few brief examples of what I mean. Are we talking about buying pre-construction units for capital appreciation that we flip? Are we talking about buying completed apartments, houses, or office spaces to generate rental income? Or are we talking about buying land to either sell as is or subdivide into smaller tracts? Matt, give us a better idea about what you are talking about today.
Well, as I mentioned before, in Santiago, I personally recommend buying older apartments and flipping them. The reason I buy older apartments, I just find the quality to be much higher once they've been renovated. You've got much thicker walls, you've got really nice parquet floors, and I just like the areas where they are. The worst I've done on apartment flipping has been about 24% in 6 months. Other than that, I'd say pretty much anything that's well located will generate decent rental yields of 5 to 8% plus potential capital gains. And then we come to farmland investments. If you're going to be an absentee owner, I'd only ever recommend buying raw farmland just to rent out to farmers on an annual basis and to focus on probably capital gains there, because the rental yields can be maybe 3 or 4% maximum. But unless you have a very big budget, it's generally not worth hiring a manager to rent out a productive farm with vineyard or fruit orchard on it.
Matt, great breakdown. Now, I'm going to hit you up with a two-part question that I know everyone wants to know, and you have to give us a general range so we have some price points in mind. Here they are. Part 1, what would be the price range of what we are talking about? Maybe give us a starting price point at the low end to a final price point at the high end. And Matt, just to clarify, I'm talking about total purchase price.
Okay. In Santiago, to be honest, it's really difficult to find anything worthwhile for under around $200,000 these days. There are properties for less, but they're generally not very nice, very small, and not necessarily in areas I would personally advise investing in. Once you get up to around $300,000, you can definitely find some really, really nice properties, and then $400,000 and above will get you something pretty amazing in Santiago.
Okay, Matt, and a transition to part 2, what would be the cost per meter? Again, maybe a starting price point at the low end and a final price point at the high end, just for a general range.
Okay, for unrenovated older apartments, you're probably looking at anything between $1,300 and $1,500 per square meter in the neighborhoods I mentioned before. And then once you go up into the kind of like the high-end residential neighborhoods like Las Condes and Vitagora, then you can easily start at $4,000 a square meter and go up to maybe even $5,000 in some parts.
And of course, for listeners like me who are used to dealing in square feet, divide the number you hear by 10.76 or maybe just a flat 10 to keep it easy, and you get close enough numbers to get an idea of what Matt is referring to. We are laser focused on specific areas of Santiago. We know our starting price point. We have an idea of cost per meter. We have specific Santiago locations to focus on. Now, let me ask you an obvious question. Matt, how do we buy?
Actually, pretty simple process in Chile. I mean, the general process is you make an offer, you have the offer accepted. Then you sign a pre-contract agreement called the Promesa de Compraventa, and you usually leave your check for 10% of the value of the property. Now, that check is held by the notary and is not cashed unless you back out for no legal reason. The promesa, part of the clause, one of the clauses will be that the title has to be clean and clear. So during 60 to 90 days that you have, your lawyer will check the title. Although this can actually take us a little bit, about 3 weeks if all the paperwork's in order, and generally for residential property, it usually is. So once your lawyer has confirmed clean and clear title, you sign the purchase contract called the escritura, and then you leave cashier's checks with the notary. The cashier's checks are only released to the seller once the property has been officially registered in your name.
And then, Matt, do we need to come in with all cash, whether that's from our checking account, home equity line of credit, or retirement funds, or can we come in with a certain percentage down and get local financing from a bank or credit union?
Unfortunately for foreign buyers, it's cash only. There's no access to the local credit market. The banks in Chile are very risk averse, which is, at the end of the day, a good thing, but it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes.
Okay, Matt, anyone who has ever owned real estate can tell you need to have a money exit strategy in place even before you buy. It's something what I like to call, where's the cheddar? You are buying the property to do what with it to make some money. So, Matt, where's my cheddar?
Well, as I mentioned, buying to flip is generally a very good business. We've talked about that a little bit before. But I'd also suggest buying to rent out to tourists or foreigners who move down for work. It can be quite hard for non-residents to get long-term unfurnished apartment rentals because you need a local guarantor. So they're usually limited to furnished rentals. For furnished rentals, you should be looking at maybe 8 or, well, low end 8 and possibly up to 15% returns. So if you combine that with buying an older apartment, renovating it, and then renting, you're doubling up on your return on investment, I think.
Wow, Matt. I wanted to thank you for taking the time to share with us about Santiago real estate. We have heard about your journey, why you chose Chile, exact areas of Santiago to focus on, price points to look out for, and then what we might do with it after the fact to make some cheddar. Unfortunately, it's time to say goodbye. But before we do, share with us easy ways to get a hold of you, any parting advice you might want to share, and then let's say goodbye.
Well, the easiest way to get a hold of me is through my website, which is www.chileinvestments.com, or you can send me an email to mfr@chileinvestments.com. Parting advice, I would say, firstly, you should definitely come down and visit Chile. It's a beautiful country. Can't think of many places in the world which have so many different types of terrain. I mean, you've got Patagonia in the south, you've got the world's driest deserts in the north, vineyards, colonial cities, UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Apart from tropical jungle, I think we've pretty much got it all in Chile.
Awesome, Matt. I have really enjoyed this conversation straight from Santiago, Chile to our earbuds, and I hope we can catch up again in 3 to 6 months.
That sounds good. It's been really nice talking to you, Taylor.
I want to thank Matt once again for his awesome take being on the ground in Santiago. It is an absolute honor and privilege for a seasoned property investor like Matt to hop on the phone, share with us his insights, and bring it directly to our earbuds. While I completely understand sometimes the quality of the call isn't perfect, let me remind you, Matt is thousands of miles away on the ground speaking about day-to-day life. Matt isn't a travel writer, he's an insider. I can't wait to get Matt back on the show again soon with more specific Santiago real estate investments he believes you need to hear about right now. If you are listening to this podcast and want to grab Matt's contact details, links on buying or selling Santiago real estate, or any other show notes, head on over to irelpodcast.com/11. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's episode and are giving away over $500 in free site upgrades to each and every property owner, agent, or developer who lists real estate on our site and leaves us an honest iTunes review. In addition, for all listeners who don't own any real estate, instead, we'll provide an awesome resource guide that will give you amazing discounts to our most popular resources, including vacation rental sites, home exchange sites, house sitting sites, and much more. Just head on over to irelpodcast.com/11 for complete details.
You have been listening to the IREL Podcast with Taylor White. Be sure to hit up irelpodcast.com for more. That's irelpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.